Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Whiteboard Friday with My Utility Genius. As you can see, dressed for the tennis, looking good in pink. First thing we want to do is look at how you set about switching, because last time round we examined the fact that 65% of you don't switch and have never switched. So firstly, we want to move you into the switching space. Secondly is, of the people that do switch, only 27% of them actually switch online. Now, what we do know is that about 62% of those switch specifically with a relationship to price. But in order to actually save some money, what do you actually need to know before you start switching online? So the first thing, the sort of big random here, is you need to know where you live. Now, you probably don't live there because that's Buckingham Palace. I'd love the Queen to switch. Probably not going to, not with us, not yet anyway. But you do need to know your postcode. Why? Because your postcode tells the supplier which of the 14 regions you live in, and those 14 regions have very distinct prices. So without the postcode, you are simply not going to get a price that is appropriate or relevant to you. Once you put your postcode in, then there are a couple of things you need to start to look at. One, are you switching dual fuel? Are you switching gas? Are you switching electricity? Secondly, do you want to go for a variable tariff or a fixed price tariff? Some of these things we are going to in fact examine in later Whiteboard Fridays in terms of what is the difference between variable and fixed. You also need to look at your payment type. So, are you going to pay cash check? Are you going to go for direct debit? There is a clear advantage in going direct debit over cash check, but you may have issues around going DD versus cash check. You can look at whether or not you go online or offline. If you go for an online billing, it reduces cost to suppliers, therefore you tend to get a better price. However, you don't get a paper bill in your hand that you can examine, annotate, and do everything else that you might like to do with it. Last thing is, do you or don't you want to go green? And again, within that sphere, there's a whole lot of additional information around what types of green you can get, where that energy is sourced from, all those kinds of things. So there's a lot more information that might sit within that. To get a lot of this information, what you're going to need to do in order to get to the point of actually switching is to understand how to read your bill. Now, the first thing you need to do is to know your current supplier, and you'll be amazed how many people don't know who their current supplier is, especially if you've got online billing and you haven't looked at your bills in years. You also need to examine what your tariff is from the supplier in question. The reason you need to know the tariff is that most switching sites will give you a saving based upon what your current tariff is. If you get your current tariff wrong, your saving number de facto is going to be wrong as well. So make sure you know what your tariff is. Don't guess, and more often than not, don't just pick standard, because standard is probably the most expensive tariff, so it will exacerbate or exaggerate your savings. You need to find what your consumption is. Your consumption will give you an idea of volume, which will give you an idea of the quantum or quantity of saving that you're actually going to make. If you use spend, be very careful. Spend is often a direct debit monthly number. It can bear no relationship to the amount of energy you're actually using, so you could find yourself overestimating or underestimating the consumption by using spend. Ultimately, we, as any switching site, would simply use your spend as a proxy for what you're actually consuming. Last thing you need to look at and find numbers called MPANs, meter point administration numbers, meter point reference numbers for gas. Two of the dullest things you're ever likely to come across in your entire time of ever having to deal with anything ever. That's what an MPAN looks like on your bill. Meter point reference number is specifically almost impossible to find. You need to hunt it down. We will have guides on exactly how to find that stuff elsewhere on our website and on other websites, no doubt, so you can certainly look it up. Last thing you need to do, make sure you get your personal details right. So your postcode, your basic details, your bank details, your residential status, your employment status, all that kind of stuff. But you will get results on a switching site simply from having gone through this stuff. What we'll then look at next week is effectively, in more detail, what do we mean by variable and fixed? What do we mean by green? What are the actual implications of online, offline? What are the actual implications of DD? Till then, have a great week.